In the heart of Washington, D.C., there lived a chef who had spent years perfecting his craft. This wasn't just any chef. He was someone whose name was whispered with admiration in culinary circles. People called him the flavor magician, because every dish he created felt like poetry on a plate. His restaurant, tucked away in a cozy corner of the city, was always bustling. From food critics to celebrities and even politicians, everyone wanted to taste what he had to offer. One crisp autumn morning, as the sun peeked through the windows of his small apartment, something unexpected happened. The chef heard a knock at the door. When he opened it, he found an envelope lying on the doormat. It was thick, official-looking, and bore the presidential seal. His heart skipped a beat as he tore it open. Inside was an invitation that would change everything, a request for him to prepare the main course at a state dinner hosted by none other than the President of the United States. The guest list was impressive: world leaders, diplomats, influential figures from across the globe. And among them was one name that stood out: Karoline Leavitt. She wasn't just another guest, she was a media personality known for her sharp tongue, larger-than-life presence, and knack for making headlines. Her reputation preceded her everywhere she went, and chefs often dreaded working with her because of her long list of demands. But this was no ordinary event. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and the chef couldn't say no. As soon as the excitement settled in, reality hit hard. Preparing a meal for such an occasion wasn't just about cooking delicious food. It was about creating an experience. Every detail mattered: the flavors, the presentation, the story behind each dish. He knew this dinner wasn't just for show. It was meant to celebrate diplomacy, culture, and unity. It had to be perfect. For days, the chef locked himself in his kitchen, brainstorming ideas. He wanted to create something that represented the spirit of America while also paying homage to global traditions. After countless trials and tastings, he finally landed on a menu that made his heart race with pride. The centerpiece? A slow-cooked lamb dish infused with fresh herbs sourced from local farms, paired with seasonal vegetables grown sustainably. Each bite told a story of hard work, community, and respect for nature. But then came the twist. 2 weeks before the big day, the chef received a call from Karoline Leavitt's assistant. The message was clear and direct. Karoline expected a specific dish on the menu: lobster mac and cheese, her all-time favorite comfort food. Not only that, but she demanded it replace the lamb dish entirely. If her request wasn't met, she warned she wouldn't hesitate to publicly criticize the entire dinner. The chef froze. On one hand, pleasing Karoline could save him from potential embarrassment or negative press. On the other hand, changing the menu at the last minute would mean abandoning the vision he'd worked so hard to bring to life. More importantly, it would compromise the theme of the evening, an ode to unity and cultural richness. Torn between two paths, the chef spent sleepless nights weighing his options. In the end, he made a decision that surprised even himself. He chose to stick to his original plan, believing that staying true to his principles was more important than catering to one person's preferences. Little did he know, this choice would set off a chain of events that would leave the entire nation talking, and turn the state dinner into far more than just a formal gathering. The days leading up to the state dinner were a whirlwind of activity. The chef threw himself into preparations, determined to make every detail flawless. He spent hours in the kitchen with his team, fine-tuning recipes and rehearsing plating techniques. Each ingredient was chosen with care: fresh herbs from local farmers, vegetables picked at their peak ripeness, and lamb sourced from a ranch known for its sustainable practices. Every element of the meal had meaning, and he wanted guests to feel that connection when they took their first bite. But as focused as he was on the food, the looming shadow of Karoline Leavitt's demand weighed heavily on his mind. Her assistant had been clear: lobster mac and cheese or else. It wasn't just about the dish itself, it was about control. Karoline was used to getting her way, and she wasn't shy about using her influence to bend people to her will. The chef knew this all too well. Friends and colleagues warned him not to underestimate her reach. "She can ruin you," one of them said bluntly over coffee. "You're playing with fire." Despite the pressure, the chef refused to budge. He believed deeply in the menu he'd created. To him, it wasn't just food, it was art, a reflection of who he was and what he stood for. Changing it now would feel like erasing part of himself. Still, doubts crept in late at night when the kitchen was quiet, and the weight of the decision pressed down on him. What if she followed through on her threat? Could he handle the backlash? Would anyone understand why he chose integrity over appeasement? To distract himself, he leaned even harder into the work. He visited the farms where his ingredients came from, shook hands with the farmers, and thanked them for their dedication. Seeing the pride in their eyes reminded him why he became a chef in the first place, not for fame or accolades, but to create something meaningful. By the time he returned to the kitchen, his resolve was stronger than ever. He told his team about Karoline's demand and explained why he wouldn't give in. To his relief, they stood firmly behind him. "We've got your back," his sous chef said with a reassuring smile. "Let's show them what we're made of." As the big day approached, excitement buzzed in the air. The White House staff coordinated tirelessly to transform the space into a breathtaking venue. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above long tables, adorned with pristine white linens and elegant floral arrangements. Everything was picture perfect, ready to welcome some of the most powerful people in the world. But behind the scenes, tension simmered. Word had spread about Karoline's ultimatum, and whispers filled the hallways. Some wondered if the chef had bitten off more than he could chew. Others admired his courage, quietly rooting for him to stand his ground. On the morning of the dinner, the chef woke up early, his stomach a mix of nerves and determination. He arrived at the White House hours before the event, overseeing every step of the setup. His team worked like a well-oiled machine, chopping, sautéing, and seasoning with precision. The aroma of roasted lamb and fragrant herbs wafted through the air, mingling with the faint scent of fresh flowers. As the clock ticked closer to serving time, the chef took a moment to step outside and breathe in the crisp evening air. Looking up at the grand building bathed in soft golden light, he reminded himself why he was here, to share his passion with the world. Back inside, the guests began to arrive. Dressed in their finest attire, they mingled under glittering lights, exchanging pleasantries and posing for photos. The energy in the room was electric, a blend of anticipation and prestige. Servers glided gracefully between clusters of guests, offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Cameras flashed constantly, capturing every laugh, every handshake, every sip of wine. Reporters hovered nearby, eager to document any moment that might make headlines. When it was finally time to serve the main course, the chef felt his pulse quicken. This was it, the culmination of weeks of hard work. Waiters carried out trays of his meticulously plated lamb dishes, each one a masterpiece. Guests murmured in appreciation as the plates were set before them, marveling at the vibrant colors and intricate designs. For a brief moment, everything seemed perfect. Then disaster struck. Karoline Leavitt scanned her plate, her expression darkening instantly. There was no lobster mac and cheese in sight. Without hesitation, she snapped her fingers and summoned a waiter. "Excuse me," she said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Where's my dish? I specifically requested lobster mac and cheese. Is this some kind of joke?" The room fell silent. All eyes turned toward the kitchen where the chef stood, frozen, gripping the edge of the counter. He had known this moment might come, but nothing could have prepared him for the storm that was about to unfold. The room froze as Karoline's voice cut through the air like a knife. Her tone was sharp, commanding attention whether people wanted to give it or not. The waiter who had approached her table hesitated, unsure of how to respond. He glanced toward the kitchen where the chef stood watching the scene unfold. It was clear that this wasn't just a casual complaint. It was a declaration of war. Karoline didn't wait for an answer. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms with a smug expression that dared anyone to challenge her. "Let me make something very clear," she said, raising her voice slightly so those around her could hear. "I was promised my dish would be on the menu tonight. Instead, I get this?" She gestured dismissively at the plate in front of her, her lips curling into a sneer. "This isn't what I asked for, and frankly, I find it disrespectful." Her words hung heavy in the room. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths, and all eyes turned toward her. Some guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, while others leaned in eagerly, sensing drama. Reporters stationed near the dining area scrambled to capture the moment, their cameras clicking furiously. Karoline thrived under the spotlight, feeding off the attention like a performer on stage. But for the chef, standing quietly in the kitchen doorway, this felt less like theater and more like a sinking ship. He knew he couldn't ignore the situation. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward, his movement steady despite the storm brewing inside him. As he approached Karoline's table, whispers rippled through the crowd. People recognized him instantly, the man behind the food they'd been raving about moments ago. Now he was walking straight into the lion's den. "Ma'am," he began, his voice calm but firm. "I understand your disappointment, and I apologize if there was any confusion regarding the menu." His words were measured, respectful, but unyielding. However, tonight's meal was designed to celebrate unity and culture. Changing the menu last minute would have compromised the integrity of the experience we aim to create. Karoline raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Integrity?" she repeated, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "You're calling this integrity? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like stubbornness." She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice just enough to sound menacing. "Do you have any idea what happens when someone crosses me? Let's just say your little restaurant might not survive the fallout." The threat landed like a punch to the gut. The chef felt the weight of her words pressing down on him, but he refused to let them break him. He met her gaze squarely, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. "I respect your opinion, ma'am, but I stand by my decision. This menu represents months of hard work and collaboration. It's meant to honor the occasion and the people gathered here tonight, not cater to one individual's preferences." For a moment, the two locked eyes, tension crackling between them like static electricity. Then, without another word, Karoline pushed her chair back and stood up. She grabbed her clutch and signaled to her entourage, who quickly fell into step behind her. Before exiting the room, she turned to address the chef one final time. "Enjoy your 15 minutes of fame," she said coolly, her smile razor-sharp. "But don't think this is over." As she swept out of the room, the atmosphere shifted. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to say or do. Some murmured sympathetically toward the chef, while others speculated quietly about what might happen next. The reporters continued snapping photos and jotting notes, already envisioning the headlines this confrontation would generate. Back in the kitchen, the chef exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. His team gathered around him, concern etched on their faces. "Are you okay?" his sous chef asked softly. "I'll be fine," he replied, though his voice carried a hint of weariness. "This isn't the first time someone's tried to push me around, and it won't be the last. What matters is that we stayed true to our vision. That's something no one can take away from us." His words seemed to lift the mood slightly. The team nodded in agreement, rallying behind him. They returned to their stations, determined to finish the evening with professionalism and grace. Meanwhile, the guests resumed eating, though the energy in the room had shifted. Conversations buzzed with speculation about what had just happened, and many found themselves admiring the chef's courage. Unbeknownst to him, the real impact of his actions was only beginning to unfold. While Karoline may have left the dinner early, her dramatic exit and the chef's bold response had set off a chain reaction that would soon ripple far beyond the walls of the White House. As the evening wore on, the tension in the room slowly began to ease. The guests, initially caught off guard by Karoline's outburst, started to refocus on the meal in front of them, and that's when something remarkable happened. People began talking about the food, really talking about it. Conversations shifted from the drama to the flavors, textures, and stories behind each dish. One guest, a diplomat visiting from Europe, leaned over to his neighbor and said, "This lamb, it's incredible. It's tender, flavorful, but also simple in a way that feels honest. You can taste the care that went into it." Another chimed in, pointing out how the vegetables seemed to burst with freshness, as if they'd been picked just hours before. Even those who weren't particularly fond of lamb admitted that the dish was memorable, not just for its taste, but for the thoughtfulness behind it. Word spread quickly among the tables. People were impressed not only by the quality of the meal, but also by the chef's ability to stay composed under such intense scrutiny. A few influential attendees even requested to meet him personally. One of them, a well-known philanthropist, approached the kitchen door after finishing her plate. When the chef stepped out, she extended her hand warmly. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "Your food tonight reminded me why dining is more than just eating. It's an experience. And your courage to stand by your principles? That's rare these days." The chef smiled humbly, though he still carried the weight of Karoline's threat in the back of his mind. He appreciated the kind words, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the night wasn't over yet. Still, hearing praise like this gave him a small sense of relief. Maybe, just maybe, he had done enough to salvage the evening. But outside the White House, the story was already taking on a life of its own. Social media lit up within minutes of Karoline's dramatic exit. Reporters stationed at the event wasted no time filing their stories, and soon headlines began popping up across news platforms. Media personality walks out of state dinner. After chef refuses demand, read one. Chef stands firm against celebrity pressure at high-profile event, declared another. The internet buzzed with reactions, opinions, and memes. What surprised everyone, including the chef himself, was how quickly public sentiment turned against Karoline. Clips of her loud complaint surfaced online, showing her dismissive gestures and condescending tone. Many viewers found her behavior entitled and unnecessarily confrontational. Comment sections filled with criticisms. Who does she think she is? Why should one person dictate an entire menu? Good for the chef for standing his ground. Hashtags like Mauern stand with the chef and food over ego trended nationwide, turning what could have been a PR disaster into a moment of unexpected support. Back inside the White House, the chef remained unaware of the growing backlash against Karoline. Instead, he focused on ensuring the rest of the dinner went smoothly. Dessert was served, a delicate creation of seasonal fruits paired with a light, creamy mousse, and the guests seemed genuinely delighted. By the time coffee and tea were brought out, the mood in the room had shifted entirely. The earlier tension dissipated, replaced by laughter, lively conversation, and genuine appreciation for the evening's culinary journey. Then came the moment that would seal the night's legacy. As the final course concluded, President Anderson rose from his seat to address the gathering. The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward him. After thanking the various teams involved in organizing the event, he paused and looked directly at the chef. "Tonight," he said, his voice warm and sincere, "we celebrated unity, culture, and resilience. But none of this would have been possible without the extraordinary talent and dedication of our chef. Despite facing challenges, he remained steadfast in his commitment to delivering a meal that honored the spirit of this occasion. For that, we are deeply grateful." The room erupted into applause. Guests stood up, clapping enthusiastically as the chef made his way to the front of the room. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment for posterity. It was a standing ovation, one rarely seen at events like this, and it left the chef momentarily speechless. He hadn't expected recognition, let alone admiration, for simply doing his job. Yet here he was, surrounded by some of the most powerful people in the world, being celebrated for refusing to compromise his values. When the noise finally settled, the chef took a deep breath and spoke. His voice trembled slightly, but his words were heartfelt. "Thank you," he began, looking around the room. "Cooking has always been my way of connecting with others, of sharing a piece of myself through food. Tonight, I wanted to create something that reflected not just my vision but the beauty of coming together as a community. I never imagined it would turn into, well, what it did. But I believe that staying true to who you are, even when it's hard, is worth it. So thank you for allowing me to share this experience with you." The applause returned, louder this time, and the chef felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. For the first time that evening, he allowed himself to relax. Whatever happened next, whether Karoline followed through on her threats or not, he knew he had done the right thing. And sometimes that was all that mattered. Little did he know the ripple effects of this night would extend far beyond the walls of the White House. The chef's decision to prioritize integrity over appeasement struck a chord with people everywhere. In a world where conformity often seemed easier than conviction, his actions inspired countless others to stand firm in their beliefs. What started as a potential disaster had transformed into a defining moment, not just for the chef, but for anyone who dared to choose authenticity over convenience. The days following the state dinner felt surreal. The chef returned to his restaurant expecting things to go back to normal, but normal was the last thing he got. His phone buzzed nonstop with calls from journalists, TV producers, and podcast hosts, all eager to hear his side of the story. Social media hadn't slowed down either. Hashtags like Mangi Stand with the Chef and Mang Food Over Ego were still trending, keeping the spotlight firmly on him. People couldn't get enough of the underdog narrative, a humble chef standing up to a larger-than-life personality who seemed untouchable. At first, he was overwhelmed. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. For years, he had worked quietly in his kitchen, letting his food speak for itself. Now suddenly, everyone wanted to know about him. Reporters asked questions that went beyond cooking. How did you stay calm when she confronted you? What was going through your mind? Do you regret not giving her what she wanted? Each question forced him to reflect on the choices he'd made and why they mattered so much. He decided early on that if he was going to step into the public eye, he would do it authentically. During interviews, he spoke openly about the pressures chefs face, especially when dealing with high-profile clients. It's easy to say yes to demands, he explained during one talk show appearance. Saying no is harder. It takes courage, and sometimes it feels like you're risking everything. But at the end of the day, I believe we should let our values guide us, not fear. His honesty resonated deeply with audiences. Viewers flooded comment sections and social media posts with messages of support. Many shared their own stories of standing up for what they believed in, even when it felt impossible. Teachers talked about refusing to lower standards for entitled parents. Small business owners recounted times they turned down lucrative deals because they clashed with their ethics. Even kids chimed in saying things like, "My mom always tells me to stick to my guns, and now I see why." Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt found herself facing an unexpected backlash. Her dramatic exit from the dinner became the centerpiece of countless memes and parody videos online. Late-night comedians roasted her relentlessly, poking fun at her refusal to eat anything but lobster mac and cheese. One sketch showed her storming out of a fast food joint because they ran out of fries. Another depicted her demanding a custom menu at a family barbecue, only to leave in a huff when someone suggested potato salad instead. But it wasn't just humor. Many people criticized her behavior as self-centered and disrespectful. Articles popped up dissecting her history of making unreasonable demands, painting her as someone who expected the world to bend to her will. Some commentators argued that her actions at the state dinner were emblematic of a broader cultural issue, the growing expectation that individuals cater to every whim of influential figures, regardless of fairness or practicality. Karoline tried to fight back, appearing on morning shows and posting lengthy defenses on social media. But the more she pushed, the more people tuned out. Her attempts to justify her behavior came across as defensive and tone-deaf, further alienating her audience. Instead of rallying support, she only deepened the divide between herself and the public. By the time she stopped addressing the controversy, altogether, her reputation had taken a significant hit. Amid all this chaos, something beautiful happened. The chef became a symbol of resilience. People admired him not because he was perfect, but because he was human. They saw themselves in his struggle, the sleepless nights, the doubts, the moments of questioning whether he'd made the right choice. And they celebrated him for choosing authenticity over compromise, even when it felt risky. Inspired by the overwhelming response, the chef decided to use his newfound platform for good. He began advocating for causes close to his heart, starting with sustainable farming. He partnered with local farmers to host workshops, teaching people how to grow their own vegetables and herbs. He also launched a mentorship program for aspiring chefs, offering guidance and resources to those trying to break into the industry. Cooking isn't just about feeding people, he told a group of wide-eyed students during one session. It's about creating connections, telling stories, and leaving the world a little better than you found it. His efforts didn't stop there. Encouraged by fans, he wrote a memoir detailing his journey, from his humble beginnings learning to cook alongside his grandmother to the whirlwind of the state dinner. The book, filled with heartfelt anecdotes and recipes, struck a chord with readers. It quickly climbed bestseller lists, earning praise not just for its storytelling but for its message of perseverance and integrity. As months passed, the chef noticed subtle changes in his life. His restaurant, once busy but relatively low profile, became a destination spot. Reservations booked weeks in advance and lines stretched around the block during peak hours. Strangers approached him on the street, thanking him for inspiring them to stand firm in their beliefs. Letters poured in from across the country, each one carrying a piece of gratitude or encouragement. Despite all the success, the chef remained grounded. He knew fame could be fleeting, and he didn't want to lose sight of what truly mattered: his craft and the people he served. Every morning, he arrived at the restaurant before sunrise, checking inventory, prepping ingredients, and mentoring his team. To him, these small acts of dedication were just as important as the big moments that had brought him recognition. Reflecting on everything that had happened, he realized how much the state dinner had changed him, not in superficial ways, but in how he viewed his role in the world. What started as a single decision to refuse a demand had grown into a movement of sorts. People weren't just talking about food anymore. They were discussing values, principles, and the importance of staying true to oneself. And while he couldn't predict what challenges lay ahead, one thing was certain: he would face them with the same quiet determination that had carried him through the toughest night of his career. Because in the end, he had learned something invaluable: that courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about doing the right thing, even when fear is staring you in the face. Years passed, but the story of the chef who stood his ground at the state dinner never faded from memory. It became one of those tales that people told over dinner tables, in classrooms, and during late-night conversations. "Remember when that chef refused to change the menu for Karoline Leavitt?" someone would say, prompting nods and smiles from everyone around. The moment had transcended its original context. It wasn't just about food anymore. It was about standing up for what you believe in, even when the odds seem stacked against you. The chef himself continued living a life rooted in humility and purpose. His restaurant thrived, not just because of the buzz surrounding him, but because he poured his heart into every dish. Customers didn't come merely to eat. They came to experience the passion and authenticity that radiated from his work. On busy nights, he could often be seen weaving through the dining room, chatting with guests and sharing stories about the ingredients on their plates. He made sure every visitor felt valued, whether they were regulars or first-timers. To him, cooking wasn't just a job. It was a way of connecting with people, of reminding them that there's beauty in simplicity and meaning in effort. But beyond the kitchen, his influence grew. The memoir he wrote turned into something more than a personal account. It became a guidebook for anyone struggling to stay true to themselves in the face of pressure. Readers highlighted passages where he described moments of doubt, underlining sentences like, "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to move forward despite it." Schools started using excerpts from the book in leadership classes, and community centers hosted discussions based on its themes. People saw in his words a reflection of their own battles. The quiet fights we all wage to hold on to our values when the world tries to pull us away from them. His advocacy work expanded too. What began as partnerships with local farmers evolved into a nationwide initiative promoting sustainable agriculture. He traveled across the country, visiting schools, farms, and community organizations to spread awareness about the importance of responsible farming practices. At each stop, he shared simple techniques people could use to grow their own food no matter how small their space. "You don't need acres of land to make a difference," he'd say, holding up a pot of fresh basil. "Sometimes, all it takes is a little soil, some sunlight, and the willingness to try." He also stayed committed to mentoring young chefs. His program, which had started as informal sessions in the back of his restaurant, blossomed into a full-fledged academy. Students came from all walks of life, some dreaming of Michelin stars, others simply wanting to learn how to cook for their families. Regardless of their goals, he treated each one with patience and respect. "Cooking is a journey," he'd tell them. "There will be failures along the way, but those are just stepping stones to success. Don't be afraid to make mistakes." One of his proudest moments came years later when one of his former students opened her own restaurant. She invited him to the grand opening, where she served a meal inspired by his philosophy, simple, thoughtful, and deeply connected to the community. As he sat at a table watching her greet guests, he felt a swell of pride, not just for her achievements, but for the ripple effect his choices had created. Her success was proof that standing firm in your beliefs can inspire others to do the same. As for Karoline Leavitt, her career took a different trajectory. While she remained a prominent figure in the media, her reputation never fully recovered. From the fallout of that night, audiences grew tired of her antics and sponsors began distancing themselves from her brand. Eventually, she faded from the spotlight, resurfacing occasionally in tabloids or gossip columns. Some speculated that she regretted her behavior at the state dinner, though she never publicly admitted it. In interviews, she avoided mentioning the incident altogether, brushing it off as a misunderstanding whenever pressed. Looking back, the chef often reflected on that pivotal evening. It wasn't always easy to relive the tension, the uncertainty, or the weight of knowing that one wrong move could have derailed everything. But he also recognized that without that challenge, he might never have discovered the strength within himself or inspired so many others to find theirs. That night taught him that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about acting with integrity, even when fear is whispering in your ear. In quieter moments, he liked to step outside his restaurant and watch the city bustle by. He thought about how far he'd come, from a young boy learning to chop vegetables in his grandmother's kitchen to a man whose name was synonymous with resilience and authenticity. He thought about the people he'd met along the way, the farmers who trusted him with their produce, the students who looked up to him, the strangers who thanked him for giving them hope. And he thought about the lesson he hoped people would take away from his story, that sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most rewarding outcomes. By the time he retired, the chef had left an indelible mark on the culinary world and on the hearts of countless individuals. His legacy wasn't defined by awards or accolades, but by the lives he touched and the values he championed. Long after he hung up his apron, people continued to talk about the chef who refused to compromise, proving that real impact comes not from seeking fame, but from staying true to who you are. And so the story lived on, a testament to the power of integrity, the courage to stand firm, and the enduring belief that doing the right thing, no matter how difficult, is always worth it. The chef's story didn't end with retirement. In fact, some might say that's when it truly began to take on a life of its own. Even after stepping away from the daily grind of running a restaurant, he remained deeply connected to the community he had built over decades. His mornings were spent tending to a small garden behind his home, where tomatoes, herbs, and peppers grew under the sun. It was peaceful work, digging in the soil, watering plants, watching nature do what it does best. But for him, it wasn't just about growing food. It was about staying grounded, remembering where everything started. Word spread quickly that the chef was still active, albeit in quieter ways. People would drive by his house hoping to catch a glimpse of him pruning his plants or chatting with neighbors over a cup of coffee. Some even knocked on his door, asking if they could sit and talk. At first, he hesitated. He wasn't used to being sought out like this. It felt strange, almost intrusive. But soon he realized these visits weren't random acts of curiosity. They were opportunities to share wisdom, to offer guidance to those who needed it most. One day, a young woman named Lisa showed up at his gate. She carried a notebook tucked under her arm and wore an expression that mixed nerves and determination. "I heard you mentor people," she said shyly when he answered the door. "I want to open my own bakery someday, but I don't know where to start." The chef smiled warmly and invited her inside. Over homemade tea and freshly baked bread, they talked for hours. He listened as she shared her dreams and fears, the fear of failure, the worry that she wasn't good enough, the pressure to conform to trends rather than follow her instincts. Then he told her a story, how he once faced a similar crossroads, torn between doing what was expected of him and staying true to his vision. By the time she left, her eyes sparkled with renewed confidence. Months later, she sent him photos of her newly opened bakery, a cozy little shop with mismatched furniture and shelves lined with warm loaves of sourdough. Stories like Lisa's became common. People came to him not just for advice on cooking, but for lessons on life. A struggling single father learned how to cook nutritious meals for his kids without breaking the bank. A retired teacher discovered a new passion for gardening and started volunteering at a local shelter to teach others. An aspiring writer found inspiration in the chef's memoir and finished her first novel. Each person walked away, changed, not because the chef gave them all the answers, but because he reminded them of their own strength. His presence wasn't limited to one-on-one interactions either. Occasionally, he'd agree to speak at events, community gatherings, fundraisers, or school assemblies. These talks were never flashy or rehearsed. Instead, they were raw and heartfelt, filled with stories of resilience and hope. One speech, delivered at a high school graduation, stood out in particular. Standing before rows of teenagers in caps and gowns, he spoke softly but firmly. "Life won't always go the way you plan," he said. "There will be moments when you feel like giving up, when the world tells you to compromise your values. Don't listen to that voice. Trust yourself. You'll make mistakes along the way. I certainly did. But those mistakes will shape you into someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate." By the time he finished speaking, there wasn't a dry eye in the auditorium. Students approached him afterward, thanking him for putting into words what they'd been feeling but couldn't articulate. Teachers shook his hand, telling him how much his message meant to their students, and to them. That night, as he drove home, he thought about how far-reaching a single act of kindness could be. The ripple effects of standing firm in your beliefs weren't confined to grand gestures. Sometimes they came from quiet conversations, shared meals, or simply showing up when someone needed support. As the years went by, the chef noticed something remarkable happening. His influence extended beyond individuals. It reached entire communities. Inspired by his emphasis on sustainability, towns across the country launched initiatives to promote local farming and reduce food waste. Restaurants began adopting practices he championed, prioritizing seasonal ingredients and ethical sourcing. Even schools incorporated lessons about mindful eating and environmental stewardship into their curriculums. It wasn't just about food anymore. It was about fostering a mindset of care for each other, for the planet, and for future generations. Despite all this, the chef remained humble. He often joked that he was just a guy who liked to cook, brushing off praise as though his contributions were insignificant. But those who knew him understood otherwise. His actions had sparked a movement, a quiet revolution of authenticity, integrity, and connection. People looked to him not because he claimed to have all the answers, but because he embodied the idea that everyone has the power to create change, no matter how small. Toward the end of his life, the chef spent many afternoons sitting on his porch, surrounded by photo albums and letters from people whose lives he had touched. There was a picture of Lisa cutting the ribbon at her bakery opening, a thank you note from the single father whose kids now loved vegetables, and a sketch drawn by a child inspired by one of his workshops. As he flipped through the pages, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment, not from accolades or achievements, but from knowing he had made a difference. When he passed away, the outpouring of love was overwhelming. Social media lit up with tributes and news outlets ran stories celebrating his legacy. But perhaps the most touching tribute came from a group of former students and mentees who organized a nationwide Day of Gratitude. On that day, restaurants donated meals to shelters, families cooked together, and strangers exchanged recipes as a way of honoring the man who had taught them the value of sharing food and of staying true to oneself. Long after he was gone, his story continued to inspire. Books were written about him, documentaries filmed, and podcasts recorded. Yet none of these captured the essence of who he was better than the simple truth. He was a human being who chose to live with purpose, to stand firm in his convictions, and to believe in the goodness of others. And in doing so, he reminded us, all that courage isn't about grand gestures, it's about the everyday choices we make to stay true to who we are. Years after the chef's passing, his legacy wasn't just a memory, it was alive, thriving in ways that touched every corner of society. The Day of Gratitude he inspired had become an annual tradition, celebrated not only locally but internationally. Restaurants around the world marked the occasion by offering free meals to those in need, while families gathered to cook together and share stories about kindness they'd experienced or witnessed. It wasn't just about food anymore. It was about fostering connection, gratitude, and community. In one small town, a group of volunteers transformed an empty lot into a community garden, naming it after the chef. They planted rows of vegetables, herbs, and fruit trees, inviting anyone who wanted to learn how to grow their own food. Every Saturday morning, people of all ages came together to tend to the plants, swap recipes, and enjoy potluck lunches made from the harvest. For many, it became a sanctuary, a place where they could escape the noise of daily life and reconnect with something simple yet profound: the earth beneath their feet and the joy of creating something meaningful. The chef's memoir, now considered a classic, continued to find new readers. Schools added it to their reading lists, and book clubs discussed its themes year after year. What struck people most was how relatable it felt. He didn't write as someone untouchable or larger than life. Instead, he wrote as someone flawed, vulnerable, and deeply human. His struggles with self-doubt, fear, and uncertainty resonated with anyone who had ever faced adversity. And his triumphs reminded them that even the smallest acts of courage could lead to extraordinary outcomes. One chapter in particular stood out to readers, the part where he described walking into the White House kitchen on the night of the state dinner, knowing full well the risk he was taking. "I didn't know what would happen next," he wrote, "but I knew I couldn't live with myself if I compromised my vision. So I took a deep breath, rolled up my sleeves, and got to work." Those lines became a mantra for countless individuals facing their own challenges. A teacher struggling to maintain classroom discipline taped it to her desk. A young entrepreneur starting her first business printed it and hung it above her workspace. An athlete recovering from injury carried it in his pocket during rehab sessions. Even industries outside the culinary world embraced the chef's philosophy. Corporate leaders cited his story during conferences, encouraging employees to prioritize integrity over profit. Environmental activists highlighted his commitment to sustainability, using his example to push for greener practices. Artists drew inspiration from his dedication to authenticity, reminding themselves that staying true to their creative vision mattered more than chasing trends. Back in the chef's hometown, his old restaurant remained a beloved institution. Though ownership had changed hands several times, each new team honored his legacy by keeping the menu rooted in local, seasonal ingredients. The walls were adorned with photos of him, smiling warmly as he served dishes, teaching students how to chop onions, kneeling in his garden with dirt under his nails. Visitors often lingered longer than planned, soaking in the atmosphere and imagining what it must have been like to meet him in person. Every year on the anniversary of his death, the town held a special event called A Night to Remember. Locals dressed up, dined on dishes inspired by his recipes, and shared memories of how he had impacted their lives. One year, a woman named Teresa stood up to speak. She recounted how, as a teenager working her first job at a diner, she had burned nearly every dish she tried to prepare. Discouraged and ready to quit, she attended one of the chef's workshops on a whim. Instead of criticizing her mistakes, he praised her effort and taught her techniques that turned failure into success. He believed in me when no one else did, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. And because of that, I learned to believe in myself. Moments like these showed just how far-reaching the chef's influence had been. He hadn't set out to change the world. He simply wanted to cook good food and help others along the way. But in doing so, he ignited a spark that spread farther than anyone could have imagined. People began to see the value in small, intentional actions, planting a seed, sharing a meal, lending a listening ear. These seemingly insignificant gestures, when multiplied across communities, had the power to transform lives. Decades later, historians studying the early 21st century pointed to the chef's story as a turning point in cultural attitudes toward authenticity and resilience. They noted how his refusal to compromise at the state dinner symbolized a broader shift, a growing desire among people to reject superficiality and embrace deeper values. His life became a case study in leadership courses, not because he held a title or wielded authority, but because he demonstrated that true influence comes from staying grounded in your principles. Though generations passed, the chef's name never faded. Parents told their children bedtime stories about the man who stood up to a powerful personality and inspired millions. Teachers used his example to teach lessons about courage and perseverance. Chefs framed quotes from his memoir and hung them in their kitchens as reminders of why they chose this demanding yet rewarding profession. In a world that often felt chaotic and divided, the chef's story offered a sense of hope. It reminded people that even in moments of conflict or uncertainty, there is always a choice: to act with integrity, to prioritize relationships over ego, and to trust in the power of staying true to oneself. His journey proved that greatness isn't defined by wealth, fame, or accolades. It's defined by the impact you have on others, and by the ripple effects of your choices long after you're gone. So, while the chef may have left this world, his spirit endured. In gardens, kitchens, classrooms, and hearts, his legacy lived on. Not as a distant memory, but as a living force, guiding people toward kindness, courage, and connection. And perhaps that was the most beautiful part of all, the realization that one person's quiet determination could leave such an indelible mark on the world.